Hey guys, it's Mr. E here, and it's time to do another edition of perhaps one of my favorite types of videos to make for the channel, and certainly one of you guys' favorite to watch. That is power scaling the Darktide classes. Which class is the most powerful is the question we are answering today. And you might be looking at the progress bar and being like, good lord, how was it so long? Well, hey, welcome, I'm Mr. E, you must be new here. That's sort of how we need to do things, because this is a subjective list, right? The first thing that needs to happen is I need to explain what has changed. Why are we making another list? Isn't the last one good enough? The second thing is I need to explain the terms and the qualifiers by which I'll be ranking these classes, because my powerful, what I define as powerful, might not be the same to you, but by the end we should hopefully have some common terms to rank on. And then we can get into talking about each of the classes and really breaking down what makes them shine, or whatever the opposite of shining is. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop into that first little subject there, which is what has changed since the last time around when I made this list. Now, last time when I made this list, I ranked the Arbitus the highest, followed by the Ogrren. At the very bottom was the Veteran and the Psyker, and then right in the middle was the Zealot. Now, one major thing has changed very clearly. If you're looking at the date this was released, it is post-Bound by Duty, which means that the Arbitus and the Ogrren have had some very mild nerfs, and the other three classes have had talent tree reworks, as well as some significant power shifts within their meta. So we are seeing a big shift up just by the basis of the class's power alone. Then we also have a new tool, or a new sort of benchmark to appraise true power against, and that is Havoc 40. If you're looking at the screen currently, you are seeing modern Havoc 40. This might not be reflective of the future, but yeah, this is how it currently is, and it is insane out there, guys. We currently have things like Rotten Armor, Encroaching Gardens, Corrupted Stims. These are modifiers that are making enemies have double, triple, 5 times the HP potentially, and they are making them much more numerous, entirely swamping the map with foes, and it is a true slog. It is a test of your endurance and your patience a lot of time as well. Now, just to give some perspective as to how much more difficult this game mode has gotten than previous updates, the last time around when I made this list, I was actually running permadeath runs on my streams where I would get a certain amount of donations, and then I would do a Havoc 40 run with a team. And if I died, if my character died, let alone finish the mission, but if my character even died, I would delete the character. So I was very confident I could do that, right? I had about a 50-50 win rate on that endeavor. But these days, I probably have less than a 25% success rate at even completing the mission, let alone just me dying. Deaths happen left and right, because there's just so much stuff that can kill you, and so many things that can go wrong. So the game mode is devilishly hard, and in terms of like gameplay, it kind of sucks a lot of times, I'm not gonna lie. It's very difficult to like get a team together and actually do it, but at the same time, it's perfect for our purposes here today, because what it means is we can really see which classes have the stuff to hack it when the game pulls out all stops and tries to murder you. And that would really show the power potential of a class. And speaking of power potential, we need to discuss how I'm going to be ranking. Last time I did this video, I did a pseudo-quantitative measurement where I assigned a points value to 5 different categories, and then I went back and, ranked the classes based on how I thought they did in each category. That was fun, I think it was a cute way to rank them, but I don't think it was necessarily fair or balanced in terms of what is actually important in the game. I think the major flaw in it was I didn't award enough points for what was a more important topic. So for instance, I ranked boss killing and horde killing, or essentially killing everything except for bosses, as the same amount of points. But bosses are a joke if you can get rid of everything else on the map. So I should have ranked the ability to map clear so much higher. And survivability, things like survivability are important, but having catastrophic fuck-up resistance, the ability to avoid an instant death or an instant down, isn't nearly as important as just general survivability. So I rank those equally, and I just don't think that they have equal value either. This time around, I'm not going to be doing that quantitative measurement. It's going to be qualitative. We're going to be laying out sort of a thought experiment with still having some general topics to discuss the power by, and then just relating to you how I envision or how I see these classes playing out and achieving their full potential. So my qualifiers are, the values by which I'm going to be ranking power today are these. DPS potential. Their damage per second is perhaps the most important factor above all else in terms of your class's viability currently. If you can kill at a certain number of enemies per second, then you're a good class as long as you can stay away from dying. And yeah, that means that we are definitely skewing the tables in favor of enemies, or in favor of classes that can kill 2, 3, 5, 10 enemies all at once. And the faster you can kill, the better. And that is just going to be carried over into bosses, because a lot of times the classes that can kill fast as far as like individual enemies are also pretty good at bosses as well. So I'll discuss both, but yeah, just DPS in general is a very, very major deciding factor. Then we have to discuss removing threats, specialists, mutants, ragers coming up and running up in your face. You know, just generally the things that can end your game in an instant. A Reaper getting a lock on you from 30 yards away, what do you do? That sort of thing. Those sort of enemies that can just end the game in the blink of an eye if you're not paying attention and a trapper catches you, or a dog pounces you, or a mutant charges you into fire. All that stuff needs to be dealt with quickly and efficiently and without endangering your own survival. Then we also have damage mitigation and avoidance. So there is something to be said for characters that take less damage. You know, when they do get hit, they're going to take less damage, or they'll be able to recuperate that toughness damage or that health damage pretty quickly. But there's also a factor to put in here, which is, can there be some classes that just entirely do not take damage? They have long portions of their ability usage or whatever it is. That makes it so that the damage is just not coming out, just not going to be able to hit them. And those two together are quite important because it just allows you to live for longer. And if you can live for longer and do a lot of damage at the same time, you are going to eventually, hopefully, cut through all of the enemies, and that's the goal. Resource and cooldown management is up next. Resources being grenades and ammo. You know, certain classes can be very, very powerful when they've got infinite ammo, right? You know, a Rumbler Ogrren or something would be insanely powerful if you had infinite ammo, but ammo is not infinite. And so you end up at some point gassing yourself, and you'll just run out, and you'll be a lot less powerful by comparison. Same thing sort of applies to your cooldown management. There are certain abilities in the game that are very, very powerful, but they have long cooldowns. And so if you're caught out between your cooldowns, you're going to be in a world of hurt. And having a shorter cooldown, or a better way to reduce your cooldown, therefore, is going to make you much more powerful. And then finally, tide turning potential. The ability to take a bad situation and turn it into an advantageous one, or pull yourself out of a free fall nosedive in terms of losing the game and get yourself back on the feet with you and your team. There are certain abilities and certain classes and certain weapons in the game that are very, very good at this, and there are certain ones that just really don't have a whole lot of power in that sense and are relying on other members of their team to like make the big move that's going to turn that tide. And this also, I guess, would also apply to, are there classes that have the ability to snowball, to take the tempo that you have when the AI director has been thoroughly routed and just make distance in the map and crush ahead forward. And all in all, I just kind of want you to envision, you know, sort of what you're seeing on the screen here. Just hypothetical Havoc 40 scenario with just essentially tons and tons of shit coming at you. Mixed metal, there's specialist woven in there, there's bosses on a timer that are going to come out and get you. A hypothetical infinite horde scenario where you just constantly need to be fighting, killing, you know, defending, blocking, dodging, whatever it is. You are always in combat, and the longer you can keep that up and survive, the better for you. So that is all the terms, guys. I believe we are ready to begin, and I want to just one final thing before we begin. I want to just relate that this is entirely subjective, right? This does not mean that players should deny you from their lobbies because you are playing what Mr. E arbitrarily ranked as a lower power character. If you are a 10 out of 10 at a weaker character in terms of skill, and you're a 1 out of 10 at a more powerful character, well, obviously you're going to perform better on that lower power character. However, if you are investing your time in learning the game or in learning new characters, there are going to be certain ones that have a much greater return on investment because they are just more powerful. They have a higher cap. And that's sort of the instructive element that I want you to take away from here. Is there's certain classes right now that if you can learn to play them very well, you can certainly flex on the enemies and you can make your team win a lot more by having skills in those classes. So that being said, let us begin. We're starting at the very bottom of the list, the weakest character class in Darktide, which can still accomplish Havoc 40s, right? But He has fallen far from the glory days, and now is everybody's eating his lunch. I've used this terminology last time around when I was discussing the veteran, but yeah, the lunch has been thoroughly eaten for this class, and I think many of you might know it. It is the Zealot. The Zealot has dropped all the way from my favorite, albeit quite biased choice, my favorite and most powerful class ranked in the game about a year or more ago, to what I think is the weakest class in the game. And this is for a number of factors. The number one factor that has hit him is the nerfs to his cooldown. The fact that they removed the ability to spam chorus really kind of nerfed him hard into those Havoc endgame modes where his real relevancy was just being the chorus bot. And even at the time that I published this list last time around, I was like, I don't even know if I need to put Zealot as high as he is. Certainly chorus is very powerful, but I don't think that Shroud Field and Charge really contribute a whole lot in the modern era of the game, right? Charge allows you to run in and annihilate one specific enemy. Certainly you can dodge enemies and stuff while you are range attacks while you're charging in, but it allows you to make a big blast on one singular enemy, and there are just so many singular enemies that honestly that doesn't have a great impact in the grand scheme of things. And similarly, Shroud Field allows you to assassinate one enemy, whether it be a boss or a Reaper or whatever it is. But again, what you are up against as the Zealot is almost every form of damage that the Zealot does is capped by the number of targets he can hit, right? His DPS potential, single target wise, is pretty damn high. It's not the highest in the game, but it's pretty high. But he literally only has single target, excepting if you are using the Flamer. And the Flamer is a very, very encumbering weapon to pull out, and it also is incredibly capped by the amount of ammo that it can carry. So we have to evaluate him from mostly DPS perspective on just that melee. Certainly he is a very capable melee fighter and does a lot of damage to targets that he's engaged in melee, but it's very rare for him to be in a situation where he can hit more than one enemy at a time. And when he is encountered by a number of enemies, say like 3 or 4 crushers, he starts to have to do the dance because he can't stand toe-to-toe with them. He can't stagger them reliably, so they are going to push him out of position, and that is going to lose you DPS because you can't always be attacking because the enemy is swinging at you and you need to dodge. So you cannot just trade blows or just push the enemy down like certain other classes can and just continue to do your damage because you have to stay evasive. And that nature, the nature by which he is primarily a single target assassin or duelist, plus the fact that he needs to like kind of dodge and stay away from enemies in order to live in a combat, really caps his DPS potential hard. That is really the major factor that he's lost out on, in addition to that cooldown nerf, because his other abilities haven't been hit so hard by the cooldown nerf. It was really the chorus that got eaten alive by that. Additionally to this, what we're also seeing is that there is just other classes that have similar melee potential, and therefore having an ability or a class that can devote its entirety to being a melee fighter, and then just having other classes that can do that same role but also get to shoot range weapons and eliminate specials and stuff like that much better, has just made him more or less irrelevant unless you are using Chorus. Chorus is the only relevancy you have at the higher levels of difficulty, because if you really wanted to play like Charge Zealot, you could probably be pumping as much damage if you were playing with a Psyker, like a melee Psyker, or a veteran with weapon specialist and dueling sword or something. So it's very neck and neck. It's like you'd get 90% of that damage playing veteran. At the same time, you could have Shout, you could be producing ammo and grenades for yourself and for your team. Like, these are extra values that those classes can grant. That this class is kind of selfish when played from a DPS perspective, and when played from a team play perspective, his cooldowns are stupid long now. So yeah, he got big nerfed, and all the other classes shot up, which has dropped him to the 5th spot. Let's talk about some of his other potentials here. I already talked about his resource and cooldown management. He doesn't have any real ranged variants. There's no ranged archetype for Zealot, so we're not really evaluating his range strength. But again, all of his good weapons, his Flamer and his Bolter, as far as range goes, are incredibly ammo hamstrung. Like, they need more ammo, and so he's going to run out very quickly there. His cooldowns for his more DPS focused abilities are very short, but his cooldown on his most impactful ability when you're playing with a team and trying to win a high level game is very, very long. So you're going to get caught out in positions where you just don't have that cooldown as available as you'd like it to be. His damage mitigation and avoidance is top tier, right? He's probably the fastest character in the game. He can slip, slide, dip, duck, and dive around pretty much all forms of damage, and he can block lots of damage. He's very tanky outside of that. He's got until death, so he can take a death blow and then survive outside of it. He's still a very good clutch character, one of the best at taking a situation where he's the last one left on the map and then running around all the enemies that are chasing his ass and then going and getting the rescue. But if I was being chased by a massive horde of enemies on the Zealot, I would probably feel like I had very little chance to actually turn and burn and actually fight the fight. I would instead be focusing my efforts on running away and regrouping with my team, because they're the ones that actually carry the oomph to tackle these situations these days. As far as specialist and threat removal, I'd say he's okay at this. He's still got throwing knives, of course, for certain specialists. He's pretty good at killing mutants, and he's pretty decent at killing bosses and individual elites with his charge ability. And of course, the dueling sword is buoying his power a lot. But if you think about like removing the dueling sword or perhaps the knife from him, he would absolutely crater in terms of potential power. And yeah, so tide turning potential is also kind of low here. Like, yes, he can run away from a scenario infinitely and regroup with his team, but if it's just you versus the horde, say it was like a potential 1v100 fight, it would be a very, very hard fight for this character. So all in all, if we're putting it into that hypothetical infinite horde scenario, he's just going to get overrun at some point because he just can't kill enough enemies per any given unit time, and he's going to get whittled down. He can fight lots of enemies in melee, but like, melee individually killing enemies with melee only takes you so far in Darktide these days, and that's where he is really stuck. Is he can't escape that gravitational well of being a melee only boy. Okay, so let's leave that there. I'm sorry, Zealot players. I am a Zealot main from back in the day. I don't know if I'm a main for Zealot anymore, but yeah, it's pretty bleak out here just because of how powerful other classes have gotten. And that brings me to our second guy in the list here. Changing again a lot from last year. This might come as a shock to a lot of you because you see me play him a lot on stream. It's the Ogrren. The Ogrren is the second least powerful in the game, and this is in large part due to his lack of options. He kind of has like one or two viable options for setups that can actually like do anything. In like weapons wise, he's got the Bully Club Mark III, he's got the Rumbler. The Rumbler, of course, is definitely resource capped. It's very, very ammo hungry and can do a lot of work, but you need to be constantly picking up ammo packs to keep it full. His DPS potential is fairly decent, and unlike the Zealot, he can stand toe-to-toe with a ton of enemies. He can taunt into their faces and then stagger them such that they can't react or they can't fight back against you, and then beat them down while they are disabled. And his cooldown on his taunt comes back fairly quickly thanks to the stagger cooldown reduction, but at the same time, it is still a pretty long cooldown, and the real threat for the Ogrren is not necessarily his DPS, which he does pretty good DPS. It is more the ability or the lack of ability to deal with specialists and threats that are just going to annoy the shit out of you. This is the thing that I think makes Ogrren probably the most frustrating to play. Is it seems like every specialist enemy on the map is going for you in particular. Now, if you're in a hypothetical 1v infinity army, everything is going for you. But even in practical games, when you have mutants on the field, or dogs, or trappers, or whatever, it seems like 9 times out of 10, they're honing in on you, especially those fucking mutants, dude. Mutants will collide with you as Ogrren, and they will... Not only do they punish Ogrens more than they punish any other class, they get 4 hits instead of 3, they will hold you to the ground for longer as a result, and they'll throw you, and by the time you're on the ground again, you have a limited dodge count, and also your dodge doesn't have as much displacement based on the relative to your character model as other classes do, so it's very likely you'll get scooped up by another mutant again, or you'll get hit by a grab from a chaos spawn, or whatever it is. It's just so much harder to stay out of those damaging effects or those crowd control effects that can just instantly end your run, such as being trapped, such as being hit by a flamer that immediately starts blasting you, mutant charges, dog pounces. All that stuff is like annoying for normal characters, yes, but they're so nimble and they're so small that barely dodging will get you out of the way. For the Ogrren, if you aren't timing incredibly well, you are going to get hit by these, and it's probably the #1 way you can lose as Ogrren is just getting chain CC'd. Even though he is now immune to getting stuck by enemies trapping him on all sides because he can dodge through them, he's certainly a very, very capable snowplow. It's those threats that are going to stand 20 feet off and try and just instantly kill you with traps, with flamers, that are going to be your undoing with Ogrren, because he just does not have enough mobility. He certainly has infinite defense. He can take damage all day, and he can recuperate his toughness at a relatively equal rate, but if you're going into a hypothetical infinite situation, you are going to eventually get grabbed or trapped or sniped or something, just because you cannot stay mobile enough given his stamina regeneration, given his dodge count being low, and given his large size, his large frame. So that's really the drawback for the Ogrren. I think he certainly does have one of the more powerful abilities in the game with the taunt. I think it is absolutely game-changing, incredibly impactful from a team-based perspective. It is entirely a tide-turning ability, and I think his cooldown management is pretty decent. His resource management, not so much, right? His best grenade is not regenerative, and his best weapon, his best range weapon, is the Rumbler, which is very, very ammo hungry. So he's gonna run out of resource if he's going for anything focused on those. And if he's not, he's pretty much limited to just swinging the Bully Club back and forth, right? So I think for the hypothetical power cap for the Ogrren, he would very likely just get picked up by a special of some sort, or picked on by gunners, because like if you've got gunners targeting you, you have no way of evading their fire for any reasonable amount of time. The Ogrren's dodge, his like slide dodge, is much shorter in window than other characters are, whereas the Zealot can like slide on the ground forever dodging fire. The Ogrren will get hit almost immediately after getting out of that, so you really have to play around cover with the Ogrren, which is very counterintuitive. A lot of times you'd think you'd be the big bulwark that can just run in there, and certainly you can when taunt is up, but when it's down, you are incredibly vulnerable to getting picked apart and dying in spectacular fashion. So that's why I'm putting the Ogrren down here, and I think he's still very, very powerful. Obviously, I like playing him a lot. He wins games, certainly, but on his own, in terms of his own individual power to like sway the game, I don't think it's all about him anymore. And just above him, we are going to put the Ogrren Light. I don't mean that. I mean the Ogrren like weight-wise light. The Arbitus is going at rank #3. The Arbitus, and right now you guys are realizing, holy shit, what my top two are those? Yeah, that's right. That's where we're going with this, because right now the Arbitus, especially after some of his nerfs, has lost a lot of his absolute stupid stacking damage potential. I think after all told, the nerfs that have hit him, he's lost about 15-20% damage, and he already didn't have very competitive damage. This was always the thing with the Arbitus, where when I had previously evaluated him, I was ranking him as the best in the game because he's nigh invincible, right? He's very, very hard to kill. He has insane toughness, regeneration, toughness damage reduction, and he also had about 25 more toughness back in the day. So he had a very high baseline toughness. And he also gets to retain mobility, which is something the Ogrren sorely lacks. His ability to dip, duck, and dive is so much better than the Ogrren, and he has a similar level of stagger potential, right? So when we're coming up against a pack of like 4 crushers, this class can engage on them with, maybe he's got the dog, or more likely, if you're going for like a very optimal setup, you've got the charge and you've got forceful. So you'll just charge into these enemies, you'll knock them all to the ground, and then the staggering DPS potential of his Arbitus Shock Maul, which does not have much damage reduction against these crusher enemies or heavily armored enemies at all, will beat them to death in a couple of seconds. And that was sort of where I thought this class was super powerful is into most games of Havoc at the time, you'd run up against situations where you'd have, packs of like 10 elite enemies, and this guy could just wade in there, pull on his big boy pants, and just beat them all down, beat them to death in a couple of seconds. And that's impressive. But you'd start to notice little things when it would be him versus a boss. Like, he would be the last man alive, and like a chaos spawn would get on him, and he'd be there all damn day. And really, what that spoke to was this class does not have a very high, what do we say, like sustained DPS potential. A lot of classes in the game that have a very high sustained DPS are able to add in extra effects that do considerable DPS or make targets take more damage for an extended amount of time. So Ogrren, for instance, has a much higher sustained DPS on bosses and large targets than the Arbitus does because he can apply stacks of bleed up to 16 with batter. Same thing goes with the Zealot. He can get up to 16 stacks of bleed, as well as the Zealot has much higher spikes in damage because his crit is, and his weapons that hit with crit are much higher scaling, so he can blow up a target for like 15,000 damage in one hit. The Arbitus is stuck at dealing, hits that do a moderate and significant amount of damage with his best weapons, but really only when compared to the health pools of lower down enemies. Now, when you get into having bosses on you that have 100,000 HP, you're literally going to have to hit them over 200 times to kill them. So it's not exactly favorable for him there. He can run roughshod over lots of smaller enemies. His shock maul is killing shotgunners in one hit, gunners in two, reapers and stuff getting beat down. And he can certainly stand toe-to-toe with lots of enemies for a long time, and he isn't very resource intensive at all. He has low cooldowns. He doesn't really rely on his ranged weapons at all. He can certainly, avoid and mitigate lots of damage because he's relatively mobile in addition to being able to deal with specialists. If, of course, you've got the dog, you can just sick the dog on them, or you can pull out your ranged weapon and shoot them. But his DPS potential, right? When you're coming up against it, these days, he just does not have enough competitive damage to just turn and burn on a horde, right? The hordes are so thick and so dense and have so much health. And I think, honestly, even though this character isn't necessarily as kneecapped by the Crusher changes, which, if you're unaware, the Crusher doubled its HP, as other characters that use less effective weapons against Crushers, that did really hurt him. Because making enemies that have higher health bars or like higher amounts of health means that he'll stagger them initially. He'll get them into that first stagger, and usually his strength is in, okay, I hit this enemy one time, they are now staggered, I can kill them before they get to react. But when you get into a situation where you stagger the enemy and you start beating on them and then they recover from the stagger and you can't stagger them again because they get stagger resistance after that first stagger is reached, then they get to actually act on you and take swings. And that's where he's going to start to lose out in the current iteration of things. Now, things that are keeping him above Ogrren, as I said already, is that the ability to dodge and evade specials and just not be stuck in as much annoying stuff. He can, of course, use Rebreather and ignore Pox Gas if that was a consideration, right? He's got much shorter cooldowns. He can stagger enemies pretty much as much as Ogrren can, and he's got shock mines, which can also regenerate every minute. So his resource regeneration potential is very high. If you're in a hypothetical infinite horde scenario, you can probably fight pretty competently for a minute, get a shock mine, and then you get 15 seconds during which you regenerate the next free shock mine while you're just standing in that one and fighting and holding off everything while it's staggered. But at the same time, he is still just absolutely hard capped on how much stuff he can kill per second, and so eventually he will get overrun. He needs his team to be with him to keep that DPS potential high enough to erase larger targets. And that is the truth of Arbitus as it currently stands. I think a lot of people are, including myself, are coming to this realization that yes, perhaps he isn't as crazy OP as we once thought he was. He is certainly invincible. Like, if you're a capable player at all, you should not be dying on Arbitus. I firmly believe. But when it comes down to it, like, you need to kill stuff at the end of the day. You can't just run to the end of it. I mean, you can, but that's not an honorable way to play, and that's not what we want to explore here today. If you have to fight everything to beat the mission, then he's not exactly going to be the best choice. What you'll want to go with is one of the remaining two classes. And yeah, this is going to be crazy, guys. It feels bizarre to be here, given that the remaining two classes to talk about today are the Psyker and the Veteran. And these two classes were my number, the last two places, basically, in my last two lists, I believe. I put the Veteran last place and the Psyker just above him in my last tier list. And in my first tier list ever, I put Psyker dead last. I can't remember where they were in that second one. But yeah, what has changed for these classes? Well, it's all about the DPS, guys. And the way that they've shifted these classes is that they have as much melee prowess and just damage prowess as any other class does in melee configuration, but also these are the best ranged characters in the game. And ranged is very, very powerful, especially some of their optimal range choices, because let's just go ahead and cut to it. We're going to be putting second place as the Veteran. The Veteran has as much, or at least like 90 to 95% as much melee potential as the Zealot does, pound for pound. He has absurd stacking damage on his melee attacks these days, with talents like Exploit Weakness, which give you 20% all damage when you crit for 6 seconds. He has a minor node that gives him 15% melee damage. Then he has, following that up, he's got Desperado, which gives 10% crit and 25% weak spot damage. And he's got Reciprocity, which gives him up to 25% crit when you're dodging. So this class has a huge steroid to his melee damage, plus he gets a ton of crit boost. And on top of that, he gets one of, probably just still the best ultimate ability in the game, which is Voice of Command. Voice of Command recently saw a very mild nerf. Took 5 seconds off of the overall timer that the gold buff will linger on your character, but that really doesn't matter. What Voice of Command brings is the ability to take multiple hits in melee back-to-back sequentially without taking any health damage. Without gold toughness, you cannot do that, right? The first melee hit you take, if you take another one without recuperating all of that toughness to 100%, you will take some health damage. So this character, the Zealot, can play sloppy. He can take hits sequentially and not take any health damage, which means he can sustain his health values much longer. At the same time, he is the only character in the game that can shoot a range weapon that uses ammo potentially infinitely, because he can regenerate ammo using Survivalist Aura forever. As long as you're killing elites, you can do it. And the same thing applies to grenades, which have seen a huge buff. Grenades, especially crack grenades, are now killing so many more enemies, and they have so many more charges, and they have always been crazy in terms of how much you can regenerate. So you're not only regenerating 1 every minute, which in terms of like a normal length game is 30 or so, but you have a 5% chance when anyone kills an elite or a specialist to grant you another one, which means that in an average game of Havoc 40, you might generate anywhere from like an extra 30 to 60 grenades. Like, it's insane how many grenades you can poop out with this thing, and grenades are ultra impactful for him. So if you're thinking about what he's got for DPS potential, obviously he's got very strong melee, but also he gets to bring perhaps the most deadly range weapon in the game, the plasma gun. But as far as the ammoed range weapons, if you can see which direction this is going for our last character, right? The plasma gun can effectively kill infinite enemies in a big long straight line, and it doesn't have to reload if you're using weapon specialists, and it's of course pretty damn ammo efficient of what it does. It doesn't really have any downsides to it other than it makes you move a little bit slow when you're using it. And this class can print more ammo for it. He can fill in the gaps with his melee functionality, and of course, yeah, he's got the ability to weapon swap very quickly and get this thing out and blast and then go back to meleeing. He's got the shout up on effectively, if you have maximum cooldown reduction, if you're the one who's killing all the specials, right, then you are getting your cooldown from 30 seconds to 15, and then of course you got to shave an extra 12% off of that, because you're going to have cooldown reduction curios, so you're going down to about 12 seconds with a 10-second gold buff uptime. So there's only a very small window where if this character is playing optimally and killing specialists on cooldown, then they're actually vulnerable to taking damage, really. So that's the thing. And like the shout also keeps enemies away from you, so it's very hard for you to reasonably get surrounded and overwhelmed. Anytime you've got a large mass of very threatening enemies like crushers or whatever, just throw a crack grenade at them. Okay, now they're dead. And then you just have a good chance on every kill to regenerate more and more crack grenades and stall out the game forever. So this class not only has insane DPS potential between being able to melee as good as Zealot is, but also you can quick swap to a plasma gun and just blast down ranged threats like specialists, trappers, and stuff like that. Those sort of enemies to him do not phase him at all, right? Trappers, instantly dead. Flamers, instantly dead. Mutant charges at you, stab him in the face with the dueling sword because it has like a quadrillion damage. This class can still two-piece a crusher with a dueling sword, right? It's supposed to be a range class, but instead its melee power is so like inflated these days that it can just do that no problem at all. And of course, anytime anything gets even slightly hairy, you throw a grenade or you shout and you keep the enemies off of you. And this class, in terms of resource and cooldown management, is just like the shortest cooldown on the best ability. It's got the ability to print more grenades, the ability to print more ammo. He can block tons and tons of damage, and he's very mobile to avoid damage the rest of the time. He's got the mobility of Zealot, more or less. And then as far as tide turning potential, the ability to like save a game, probably one of the strongest characters in the game at that because of shout. Because you can throw a grenade, which will blow up, stagger everything, then shout, which will stagger everything and give everybody around you gold buff. And it'll turn the game on its head. It'll take everybody from being in a bad situation where their toughness is low and put them into an advantageous one. At the same time, a well-timed shout can push back, bursters and stuff coming in, or if you take the burster on the chin, gold toughness will prevent your team from getting absolutely blown up. And I've seen so many games ruined by a burster that should have gotten pushed and just didn't because no one pushed it, or it got pushed in a weird way and fell on its face and blew up in the ranks of everybody and like kills someone and mortally wounds someone else. You don't want to lose like that, and having shout on your team kind of just prevents that from happening. So yeah, he's second place, and I think that if you are a Zealot player like I am, and you really want to take those skills and translate them directly into something that is very, very powerful, Veteran is a great second choice because he is very simple to play. He's just Zealot, but just add in the ability to blast stuff with the plasma gun as well, and he's, going to be even better. And then we have to talk about the #1 most powerful character class in Darktide currently, which is, by process of elimination, this has to be Psyker, right? So when we talk about Psyker, we have to evaluate his sort of meta setup, the thing that gives him his power, which is crazy to say that there is a singular weapon, really, that makes him as stupid as he is. It's the flame staff. It is the flame, whatever it's called, the one that puts the fire, the big gout of fire. This weapon single-handedly puts his DPS potentials to essentially infinite, right? I'll do a video on it in the coming days, but I'm going to showcase like the potential DPS limits for all the different Psyker staffs. And it's like for electrokinetic staff, it's you can hit like three enemies at a time for some pretty decent damage. Then you've got the Void Strike that can shoot in a straight line. Then you've got the Void Blast that can do a little circle. This thing will cover a 30-degree radius cone to a range of 15 meters, which is a massive fuckload of enemies. It can be like up to 100 or more enemies that are funneling through your cone, and of course it's applying damage over time effects, so that is scaling in terms of just whittling down enemies. And the fact that this not only has the highest DPS potential in the game against the most enemies, but it also negates threats. So specialists like trappers and flamers, they immediately get hit by the fire and they just stop what they're doing because it not only will kill them very quickly, but it can also stagger them or panic them or suppress them. So yeah, they'll get thrown off of their game. And then really the only ones you got to watch out for are like mutants who will just charge through it. But we are also a very, very agile class because the Psyker has a very short cooldown on starting to regenerate their stamina. So you can always whip out your knife or your dueling sword and make some distance. Oh, of course, you still get dueling sword. Don't worry about that. So we're getting uncanny strike buffs on here. Then as far as damage mitigation and avoidance, we have potentially two of the best abilities in the game at this. The bubble is one of them that if you're playing with a team, the bubble is just like a great way to kind of like secure that you're going to win a game, because a lot of times what like the worst situations are when you're fighting a already pretty challenging fight and then you're just getting shot by a million other things. The bubble is not only a regenerative effect to your toughness, but also it is going to prevent a ton of damage coming in and hitting your team, and all, you know, it's just causing all sorts of mayhem and chaos. Blocks trapper nets and all that sort of stuff as well. But then we also have to consider damage avoidance. And I already mentioned that the Psyker is very mobile. The ability to flick with your melee weapon and get a bunch of movement speed and carry that through sliding is of course there, but perhaps more important is empathic evasion. Very high level Psykers, or even moderately high level Psykers, have realized that crit on this class is very high, and critting gives you 1 second of avoidance to range attacks. So if you are in a hypothetical infinite horde scenario, if you're kiting around a quadrillion enemies after you and you've got the flame staff, well, as long as you keep shooting the flame staff and getting crits with some regularity, no ranged enemies can land a hit on you. And the more enemies that are in front of you, the more likely it is you will pick up a crit, and therefore the less likely it is you'll take any damage at all. And of course, you can sustain this forever, and that's where we'll come to resource and cooldown management. This class, I'm very glad they fixed the way that Psykinetics Aura was working, which was previously doubling your cooldown. Now it's 60% increased cooldown, but still, this class with Warp Siphon can have a cooldown on your venting shriek ability or your bubble ability like in 10 seconds, 15 seconds, which is insane. Like you'll have multiple bubbles on the field. You'll be able to vent anytime that you're capping out in peril, and it's not even hard to maintain your peril at all. So you have infinite ammo on the best flamethrower, the best ranged weapon in the game. You have a cooldown that can just stagger all enemies in front of you or block all ranged attacks or whatever it might be up every 10 seconds. Even your third ability, which would probably be the least likely ability to be using into this scenario, which would be like Scryer's Gaze, would be this is the shortest cooldown in the game. Well, it used to be the shortest cooldown in the game with 25-second cooldown, right? So yeah, this guy is stacked. Oh, this is without even considering infinite smite. Like, a smite build that can just essentially hit everything on the screen and hold them for 25 seconds. You'll have about a 2-second window where you have to cool down because it'll expire now the way they've changed the Psykinetics Aura, but then you can just start smiting again. And so you can effectively kill infinite enemies, because smite is another skill that has infinite chaining potential and have no counterplay for the enemies. They won't be able to hit you at all. And so when we look at it as a potential to turn the tide, not only does this guy actually have pretty good clutch ability, which is something I overlooked in my previous ranking list for him, which is the fact that he can just block tons of attacks using his peril with a certain talent node that a lot of Psykers do end up taking. But he is probably the best ally to have alive at any given time because of his DPS output. If you've got an absolute fuck ton of massive horde behind you, what better ally to get up than the Psyker that's going to turn on smite and pause everything for 25 seconds? Or just start blasting with the flame staff and everything is going to start melting away and dying, right? So this guy is, he hypothetically goes to infinite. Like, this is the only class in the game that could hypothetically infinite this scenario if it is played correctly. I bet if you trained an AI in the in the Psycanium somehow to play optimally, I think all of the other classes would get overwhelmed or not be able to hack it against infinitely spawning enemies. The Psyker could do it, and I don't think it would even be that hard because you've got an infinite ammo weapon, you've got very short cooldowns, you can avoid damage in between. And you can kill at such a breakneck rate. It's honestly quite crazy. And you'd think that last time around I ranked his boss damage pretty poorly, but he doesn't have poor boss damage either. He has pretty standard boss damage when compared to a character like Arbitus does. And when you're considering monstrosities, he has way better boss damage than a character like Arbitus because he can stack Soul Blaze on these bosses and then go to town with his melee in addition, because a lot of his damage is dealt by damage over time effects. So yeah, there's no other class in the game that you're getting into a game with a capable player and they're dropping 5 million damage in a 30-minute game. But yet you can see that on Psyker. So something is broken here, right? When there's a character that can run ahead of the team and just kill everything on the map, and just solo it entirely, then yeah, they're the most powerful character, right? This is the character class that, if it weren't for just the amount of skill that it takes to avoid damage coming your way, if you just took all of the enemies on a Havoc 40 map and threw them at a character, this character could do it, right? The Psyker could do it with the Flame Staff and just blow them all up because of the multiplicative DPS factor and the ability to keep that distance. And that's the one other thing that I think really sets him apart, is like other characters, in order to like fully actualize and fully realize their killing potential. Think about it. The veteran, even when he is primarily focused on range, he still has to pull out his melee weapon and go in from time to time to pick off enemies as they approach him. The Ogrren, the Arbitus, all of them are melee focused, right? Being melee exposes you. It exposes you to not only getting hit in melee, by missing a dodge or missing a block or whatever it might be. Sometimes you just can't avoid it, right? There's so many attacks coming out per second, you can't avoid it. But also when you have your melee out, you can't then counter and get rid of, say, a trapper that's like behind a bunch of enemies in front of you. You'd need to swap to your ranged and then back up a second and a half step and take a shot, and hopefully it pierces through. The Psyker doesn't need to play that game. The Psyker can literally equip the Flame Staff at the beginning of the game and walk all the way through to the end of the game and never change weapons. He never has to engage any enemy in melee. He can keep them all at arm's length and burn them all to death, because of course the Flame Staff gets to stagger too. With Light 1, you can push things like Ragers, like fast enemies that be coming in at you. You can push them back and stop them from attacking. Just an absurd weapon on top of a pretty absurd class. Let's also give some credit to the fact that his melee configurations, like melee Psyker, is more powerful than Zealot's is. I'm convinced. The damage steroids that are available to him with Disrupt Destiny and Scryer's Gaze are so insanely power crept to this point that I don't know how like the devs haven't realized what they're doing. When you look at a class like Veteran, second place, second most powerful class, right? He's got, of course, Shout, which is his best ability, but then he's got Infiltrate and Executioner Stance. They're trying to make Executioner Stance like a thing, right? Well, Executioner Stance gives you about 25% additional damage. Scryer's Gaze gives you like, what? 20% damage, 10%, no, it's 10% damage, 20% crit, like, tons of movement speed and stacking damage and stacking crit damage. Like the stat blocks on that ability are stupid. It just shoves metric fuck tons of raw stats at you and cranks your DPS potential through the roof. And then now you're regenerating toughness while it's going on. And then you've got Disrupt Destiny that's adding even more to that. So yeah, this enemy, or this character, in really any configuration can be the DPS hog for the game, right? You can pump damage on almost every configuration of the class. Even if you are going a full support Psyker and you're just doing bubble, you're like doing bubble maximum cooldown Flame Staff, you can still be the absolute top dog in terms of damage as well. Like you can be the DPS carry and you can be the support and protect your team with bubble and do that stuff. So which is just absurd. So yeah, in summary, guys, wow, what a cataclysmic shift. I think a lot of this comes down to really having this new configuration for Havoc where like there's just infinite enemies. As soon as you don't have a Psyker on your team who's just using Flame Staff, you can feel the difference, right? You can definitely feel that difference when things are actually dying when you have Psykers on your team versus if you're going in there without and you're having to kill each enemy more or less individually. Killing enemies in huge, large swaths is like the way to play right now. And at the same time, what they've done to the character classes, especially the Zealot, the Psyker, and the Veteran in terms of their reworks, for the Zealot, the cooldown really hurt him. I don't think that overall his melee power or anything got less powerful. I just think that everybody else got way more powerful. I think it's definitely easier to play effectively as a melee character as Arbitus or Ogrren than it is to play Zealot. Even though Zealot can be a little bit more damaging, I just think it's so much easier to handle any given situation with Ogrren and Arbitus, because you can of course just stagger every single enemy that ever tries to face you and then beat them to death while they're on the ground. Then you've got Veteran, who got such a tremendous base buff to his damage potential. They cut so many filler nodes out of his tree that he's just got nodes for days now, and he gets absurd nodes like 30% weak spot damage and a literal minor node that gives you 15% melee damage. He gets 40% crit chance out of literally 2 sequential nodes, sorry, 35% crit chance out of 2 sequential nodes. Oh, and I forgot to even talk about the buffs to, I forget what the name of the ability is, but like it gives a stacking up to 25% base damage when you're sprinting, which they added to that, made it dodging. So now anytime you're dodging or sliding or anything at all, or sorry, it has to be sliding or sprinting, that now is going to stack more damage. You've also got a base damage node at the top of the tree of 15%. Like, yeah, this guy is just got damage stacked through the roof, and he already had some of the most competitive damage in the game. The only reason he was behind before was his base damage potentials were a little bit low, but he was making up for that in the fact that he could use the dueling sword, he can use shout, and he can use the plasma gun. The most powerful range weapon, the most powerful melee weapon, the most powerful ability. And that was what was keeping him kind of neck and neck. Now they gave him a bunch of baseline buffs, and he's insane. And then, of course, to top that all off with the Psyker, the reasoning behind why I don't think I evaluated Psyker fairly previously was Psyker has always had that potential, right? But now with the changes to the cooldown, I think that has really made him obviously OP. Before, you had to be very smart about when you used your abilities and like time them appropriately, and you had to have a lot of skill to pull off what you need to do on Psyker. With the way they've reconfigured Psyker and just given him just more damage, more survivability, he's regenerating a fuck ton of toughness. He's just got more toughness overall. Now they just added more base toughness to him. It makes it so that that power is so much more accessible. It's accessible even to a scrub like me, where I'm like, oh shit, like yeah, soloing a map with this class wouldn't be hard at all now, because you can just keep 20 feet of distance on all the enemies and murder them without them ever being able to touch you. If you have any decent level of movement at all, you can just venting shriek every 10 seconds and stack infinite stagger, infinite flame stacks and bosses and enemies. Yeah, stupid class, not balanced at all for the game that it's in. Certainly was probably designed to be in Darktide 2, not this game. But yeah, that is where the rankings lay, guys. Make certain you're commenting down below and let me know what you think the rankings actually should be. If you think I'm right, or if you think I'm wrong, or if you're stunned that I've had this massive turnaround on these characters. And I hope you're excited, because we're going to do this again when the 6th character class launches in just 1 month from today, guys. How fucking cool is that? I'll see you then. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Bye-bye.